Hello students, this is Professor Sarah Beck here with the next leg of our virtual field trip to Batiquitos Lagoon. In this short video, we'll take a look at the lagoon's more recent history, spanning the last 150 years or so. As you can see in this photo taken in 1925, Carlsbad and Encinitas looked very different from today, and agricultural land uses dominated the area. This had been the case for at least 50 years by the time this photo was taken. In 1875, a man named Nathan Eaton settled the area to the south of Batiquitos Lagoon and began farming. An interesting bit of historical trivia is that this area was known as Eatonville for a time, but the town was later renamed Encinitas. Let's now take a look at some of the transportation projects that have shaped Batiquitos Lagoon over the past 140 years. In this Google Earth image, our perspective is out from over the Pacific Ocean looking eastward and inland up the lagoon. The California Southern Railroad line was constructed between 1881 and 1882 between National City and Oceanside. In this beautiful recent photo, you can see one of the San Diego coaster trains passing through the lagoon. From 1901 to 1902, the California Salt Company began producing salt from 25 acres of evaporation ponds at Batiquitos Lagoon. At this point in the lagoon's history, the water flow was quite restricted, leading to lots of evaporation, which made it a pretty good site for producing salt. Beginning in 1912 and ending in 1915, the Pacific Coast Highway was constructed. In 1914, commercial cultivation of vegetables and grains began in Carlsbad, followed several years later by flowers and avocados. In 1952, the San Marcos Dam was constructed, and you can't see its location in this particular image. But this construction of this dam reduced the amount of fresh water that was allowed to flow into the lagoon, which decreased water quality. In this photo taken in 1955, you get an interesting look at Batiquitos Lagoon during this time period. You can see here, crossing the lagoon, the railroad, and over here, closer to the coast with the ocean being over here, this is PCH. Now, one thing that's missing that wouldn't be constructed for another 10 years is Interstate 5. You can see that Batiquitos Lagoon looks quite different than today, and you can see some channels kind of crisscrossing through the mud flats in this area, but what you don't see is that nice tidal flushing that you see today. And this is part of the reason that it was used for producing salt and was a salt bed much of the time. In 1965 to 1967, Interstate 5 was constructed, and all of these transportation projects negatively impacted tidal flow. By building up berms to narrow the channels to avoid having to build especially long bridges, water flow was restricted. For example, looking at the California Southern Railroad, there was a large berm constructed so that the bridge wouldn't have to be terribly long. You can also see where PCH crosses and Interstate 5 crosses that it's quite narrow, and as opposed to the width that it potentially could be without these transportation projects. All of these narrowing of the channels will also lead to increased sediment deposition, further restriction of water flow, and decreased water quality. To make matters worse, Batiquitos Lagoon was used as a site to release sewage wastewater during the 1960s and 70s, altering salinity levels and contributing further to the water quality problems. By the 1980s, Batiquitos Lagoon was in pretty rough shape. There was a lot of issues with eutrophication and algae blooms, and foul odors, and dying fish, and almost swamp-like kind of conditions. It was not a pretty picture. In 1983, Batiquitos Lagoon Foundation was established, and the following year, in 1984, the lagoon was selected for a restoration project, which began in March 1994 and was completed in July of 1997. This project was called the Batiquitos Lagoon Enhancement Project, which is the topic of our next video clip. So this is Professor Beck signing off, and I'll see you in the next video clip.